On March 4, 1789, George Washington became president and Congress was already in session. There were only 13 members of the House of Representatives and only 8 senators were on hand. Among Congress's first tasks was deciding what the president should be called. A Senate committee recommended His Highness the President of the United States of America and Protector of the Liberties, but the House argued on simply calling him the President of the United States. With the Judiciary Act of 1789, Congress created a federal court system with limited power. The Supreme Court remained a minor branch of government under its first Chief Justice, John Jay. Within a month of Washington's inauguration, James Madison set out to write the Bill of Rights. Out of the 200 state proposals, Congress eventually sent 12 amendments to the states for ratification. Only 2 were discarded, and the remaining 10 amendments were declared in force on December 15, 1791. The First Amendment protected citizens against congressional interference with freedom of religion, speech, the press, the right of assembly, and the right of petition. The Second Amendment refers to a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state and the right of the people to keep and bear arms. The Third Amendment refers to no soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner. The Fourth Amendment protected the rights of citizens against unreasonable government searches and seizures. The Fifth, Sixth, Seventh, and Eighth Amendments laid down the rights of citizens accused of crimes and established protection from cruel and unusual punishments. The Ninth affirmed that the Constitution's silence on a specific right of the people shall not be construed as a denial of that right, and the 10th ambiguously reserved all rights not delegated to the new government, but to the states respectively or to the people. During this time, the Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, turned to the problem of financial solvency. The first challenge was to raise money for current expenses, and he proposed that Congress place a tariff on imported goods and the foreign ships carrying them. This was called the Tariff Act of 1789, which passed easily. The next challenge he focused on was to pay off the debt left over from the Revolution, which was a total of $79 million. Hamilton proposed that the government assume all of the debt and pay it off at full value, even the parts that were in badly depreciated paper money, which was a plan known as funding and assumption. Rather than paying off the debt immediately, the government would give creditors new federal bonds that paid interest. In this way, Hamilton thought he could turn the national debt into a blessing by making sure that people with money had a literal investment in the success of our nation. During this time period, Southerners were unhappy about the possibility that the nation's capital might be moved permanently to Philadelphia. They preferred a site in Virginia closer to the center of the country, and at last, representatives struck a compromise. Hamilton got his debt plan, and Southerners got their nation's capital in Virginia. Hamilton's efforts to create a strong government based on a commercial economy alienated those such as Madison and Jefferson, who believed Hamilton's policies were subverting step by step the principles of the Constitution. This theme was taken up by the Democratic Republican societies, groups that had come together in the late 1792 and early 1793 to support the French Revolution, which in turn became the first political party called the Democratic Republicans. During this same time, the supporters of Hamilton's policies became known as the Federalists to suggest their commitment to the new government. By 1796, the congressional voting patterns revealed a distinct tendency to vote on one side or the other.
A society in transition. Society increased to 1.4 million. Approximately 100,000 were immigrants. Most of the population was 25 or younger. 23 million in good... Okay, I'm going to say... The rate of adultery and divorce increased tremendously. Children born out of wedlock doubled. Many European countries were rethinking their acceptance of slavery. Roughly 18% of the population was enslaved. New York had the second highest amount of enslaved.
Securing the nation. Borders, boundaries, and borderlands. Even though America came into existence in 1781, things were still unclear up until 1789. The borders were still extremely unclear. Mainly came down to territories being unmapped, being unable to mark external lands, and disagreements among states as to where boundaries would also be mapped. Native Americans were also rebelling against the newly settled Americans. George Washington and the government powers acknowledged the right to soil policy to avoid another war. Rebellions and revolutions. The Whiskey Rebellion, a riot over whiskey excise tax in which Washington pulled up with 13,000 troops. America's new independence sparks revolutions across the globe, including France and Saint Domingue. Washington supported the concept of their revolution but did not support the movement of equality for blacks. He feared it would encourage slave rebellions in the southern states. War complications. France and Spain went to war with Britain and Holland in 1793. America, wanting to avoid the pro-France partiality and intending to stay neutral with Britain, decided to stay neutral. The Jay Treaty. The treaty itself alleviated the tensions between America and the Great Britain following the Revolution. Failed to open up the profitable British West Indies trade to America, forced British troops to leave forts in Northwest Territories, solved disputes with the debts from the Revolutionary War, and ended issues between the U.S. and Canadian borders.
George Washington said in his farewell address, "Promote then, as an object of primary importance, institutions for the general diffusion of knowledge." And this is referring to schools enlightening students on every subject so people can form an opinion of their own, which is also referring to the political parties that grew during this time period. Olaudah Equiano refers to the conditions during his travels of the transatlantic slave trade, and he says, "This produced copious perspiration, so that the air soon became unfit for respiration, from a variety of loathsome smells, and brought on a sickness among the slaves, of which many died, thus falling victims to the improvident avarice, as I may call it, of their purchasers." And he is describing the purchasers' greed of the slaves, and they are not focusing on the long-term consequences, and this caused many of the slaves to fall ill and become sick and die.